My name is Leire Carbonell Aguero, and I teach in the Spanish interpretation program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies based in Monterey, in California.
I think the more that I learn about translation and interpretation, how important it is for humans to stay alive on this planet. How did you get into the business and the instruction in the world of teaching translation and interpretation?
I've always, I mean, since I was very little, I had a passion for reading. I was always with a book in my hands. And, when I was young, I was lucky enough. I'm originally from Spain, that my parents sent me to England to spend the summers there. So when it was time for me to decide what to study as my BA, I realized, well, I love reading. I love English, and then I learned about translation. So I decided to study translation, and it was in my BA that I was introduced to the world of interpretation. And I remember entering the booth in my class and realizing, oh, I love interpreting as well. So translation is everything written, interpretation is everything oral, and that's how I completed my BA and how I discovered in that journey my love for interpretation as well.
Before we talk a little about a paper that you recently had published, I want to talk a little bit more about the difference of interpretation and translation, because I think it is one of the most difficult sort of things to wrap your mind around, the difference between writing and speaking. When did you discover that difference, and did you make a mistake early on that you were chastised about, and then that really helped teach the lesson to you?
It's such a good question, Andrew. So it was in my BA, right? I remember just in my BA, and it was relatively new in Spain that, a BA in translation and interpretation was being taught. I think I was like maybe the first or the second generation studying translation and interpretation in the University of Alicante. And it was there that I learned, translation is everything written, interpretation is everything oral. And after doing my BA, I realized, well, if I want to become an interpreter, because at that point I was really passionate about interpretation. After 4 years of my BA, I have to find a master's degree to really focus on interpretation. And it was then that I found the master's degree in Middlebury. And then I went to MIS in 2001 and graduated in 2003 with a master's in conference interpretation. And I think it was at that point that I really decided to focus on interpretation only. And then, 10 years, I graduated, then I worked in the private sector for 10 years. And it was in 2011 that I had the opportunity to go back to MIS to teach one class in interpretation.
How exciting to come back to your alma mater, to the place where you had sort of grown and fostered this love. Were you excited? Was there any question about it? Or were you like, I can't wait to get back to Monterey?
I was very excited. I was also, I have to confess, very intimidated by the whole experience. I was, hoping to rise to the occasion. So I tried to do my best to prepare, to learn as well about pedagogy, about training interpreters, because up to that point, of course, I was an interpreter. But, I also had to learn to be an educator and to be a teacher. So that was definitely a challenge, but a challenge that was really welcome by me in as a way of growing. And I have to confess that I started teaching in 2011. It's 2023. So I have to say now, after, teaching for 12 years, that um, I hope my students learn from me in the classroom, but I have to tell you that I am sure that I learn as much from my students.
You have this a paper that you wrote. I'll read the title of the paper here: Teaching English Spanish Simultaneous and Consecutive Interpretation During COVID-19. In March of 2020, everything that you had understood as both a student and an instructor in a classroom environment changed, and you were faced with this change. Can you describe to me the emotional things that were happening to you in March of 2020 as you realized your whole world in the classroom was being turned upside down?
Well, first of all, Andrew, if you allow me, I would like to thank Professor Chan from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, because he was the one who invited me to write this article, and I thought it was just a wonderful opportunity um, to leave a written testimony of everything that we went through, because I think human beings, we are all so resilient that probably then, in 2023 we're back to normal, and we tend to forget. So I really appreciated the opportunity to reflect on the whole experience and to write about it. So I remember back when we were told that we had to go back home, and we had to um, resume our the master's degree online. I remember feeling overwhelmed for my students. I felt, of course, responsible, that it was absolutely paramount that the learning experience needed to be, if not the same, because of course was not going to be the same, but as similar as possible as the in-person experience. And then I remember also feeling overwhelmed by, our personal situation. For me, I remember thinking how I'm going to do it with my kids. I have two young children at home, my husband, and then my normal workload and teaching load, how I'll be able to cope with all of this. So it was overwhelming, but I think we were lucky that we had spring break. At least we had a week of vacation to try to adjust to the change and to try to think it through, and at least to get organized at a personal level to be able to deliver at a professional level.
And I encourage people to read the account. It's so thought out, and it does really bring it back all the feelings of what it was like during that time, the tumultuous things, and what we're don't know what's coming next. Anything could happen, and so you're right. I want to forget about it. I want to actively put it behind me. But you talk about some of the technology that you came to rely on in a different way. Which was the key part for you? Was it Zoom that now you were using in a whole new way? Was it finding like the hardware of a microphone and a ring light and all that sort of stuff? Which was the part for you that was the biggest challenge, or perhaps the biggest success?
I think, being in Monterrey, we are lucky that we are very close to Silicon Valley. And then many of my clients are based in the Valley, and I'm really exposed to technology. So I know I'm probably, a different generation, but I am not scared of technology. I was never scared of technology. So I feel as part of me is we were already lucky that we had Zoom as the communication platform. So I was aware of Zoom. I had experienced a little bit with interpretation. So I thought at that point we were also using Go React at that point when the pandemic hit. So I thought, okay, this might be doable. We had Professor Olsen with us as well, so I was able to use that resource, and I knew it could be done. So we were trying that week, and with relatively, I think, relative success. And then that cohort of students, they were very patient with us. As I write in my article, we already had that rapport with second years. It was almost 2 years together with our first years, because this was, the spring semester. It was almost a whole academic year together. So everybody was very patient. I think in a way, we were lucky that the pandemic, that we decided, the school closed down in the spring semester, because it was just the perfect timing to try this experiment of teaching online and to learn as we were going. So I feel at that point, I was not intimidated by the technology. I was very appreciative of my students and their patience. And I think I learned a lot by doing, if that makes sense.
The description I heard so often in that year was, we're building the plane while we're flying it. And
I couldn't agree more.
and the idea that the passengers on the plane are as much of a building the instrument as anybody else, is such a lovely and generous thing to say. So you also indicate in the future part of the paper that some of these things, this hybrid idea, is going to be moving forward. So were you surprised at some of the benefits that came from moving and teaching online?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was I guess the first one surprised that, oh, this actually can be done and it's working, you know. I think one lovely example was last January, I was able to teach a class on the UN competitive exam for interpreters in the hybrid mode. And it was very successful. I had some students on site, and I had one student participated from Qatar and one colleague from the UN who was able to participate as well and give a presentation. So I think that's a wonderful example of something that can be done in the hybrid mode. So yeah, I have to tell you that I was the first one feeling surprised about it, and you know, as well, learning to embrace the benefits of technology, that of course in education, in a way, we can expose many more students to the same content, and many times the students that, you know, who are not able to access classes in person for whatever reason it is. So I think in a way it's a wonderful equalizer.
It sounds like you're describing it's more accessible and more equitable for people to get to take these classes and to get these skills and to help make the world a better place.
I couldn't agree more. You know, I couldn't agree more. I feel, of course, it needs to be, and I wrote about that in the article. We need to think it through, and you know, I feel many times that will mean in the case of interpretation, because I feel interpretation is so specific, right? Because it's not only talking or teaching the way we're talking right now, it's being able for somebody to interpret in the booth, if that makes sense. But then, you know, the people connecting online, they have to be able to listen to the peers in person interpreting in the booth, and the opposite. So I think if anything, it's even more complicated. So of course we have to think it through. You know, the technology, the labs, they have to be there. We'll need some time to adjust, but of course I think that in the long term and for the future, it'll be a wonderful opportunity for all of us.
I want to ask a couple of specific questions about interpretation in general. My first one is, are you interpreting what I'm saying to you right now into another language? Is it just something that happens unconsciously to you?
I know. Yeah, I think so. You know, I might not be, but of course, it's always very hard to express yourself in a different language. My A language or my mother tongue is Spanish. So, you know, as comfortable as I feel in English, Spanish is always there in my head,
So and you're already living that interpretation right there through your brain synapses that have
probably.
been trained.
Yes.
You referred to
Uh-huh.
this, you've said this phrase a few times, and I'm very curious to hear more about being in the booth. What the feeling is like when you're there in the glass enclosed area with the microphone and knowing that another human is relying on you to accurately convey information to them. Do you have to get past your own ego in order to be that conduit, or do you have to embrace and just be super confident with what you're doing as yourself?
Yes, it's such a good question, right? And I guess as interpreters, we are all different, and probably we all feel different things. But what we always talk about in my classes and with the students is that, you know, you are yourself, of course, and but then the moment you enter the booth, you have to get into that zone, because interpretation is just is an activity that really needs you to be focused 100%. You cannot miss one single word of what's being said, and at the same time, it's not exactly at the same time, but almost at the same time, because you still have to analyze the message, right? But you have to produce that same message in a different language. So you are doing many things at the same time. You are listening, you're analyzing the information, and you are producing that information in a different language. And at the same time, you have to keep listening. So in a way, I feel that, of course, at the beginning, you always feel the butterflies in your stomach. You feel the responsibility. But you know, you prepare as much as possible. You train, and it's exactly at that moment that you have to start interpreting. Everything else stops, and you are just there with the message, trying to convey the message, you know, as accurately as possible. So there is that part as well of being extremely focused and maybe being in the zone, if that's the right expression in English.
The last question. Thank you so much for taking some time, and I'll include the link so people can read the article. It's such a great insight into one of the many challenges that and we're not even going to talk about your own children having to raise that and taking care of that and their digital future. That's for another conversation. But the
Well,
last question I have for you as an interpreter is there's a level of trust that people who are listening to you have, and that the person you're interpreting for, they might say something. How much do you filter the words to make it more appropriate for who might be hearing the interpretation?
right. It's such a good question. I mean, of course, everything depends on the meeting and on the environment and the kind of meeting that you are uh, working at, right? A business meeting is not the same as a, expert witness statement in the court or a medical examination or a statement in the United Nations General Assembly. So everything depends on the type of meeting. Everything depends on, is there a record, in the sense that is it going to be verbatim? So I have to be absolutely accurate. Or maybe this is just a business meeting, and what is the purpose of this meeting? What is the organizing trying to achieve with the meeting? So definitely, the trust has to be there, and I feel in a way you, as an interpreter, gain your trust with your work. Um, but then, as an interpreter, many times you choose or you make decisions based on the purpose of that meeting and based on the type of meeting, if that makes sense.
It does, which leads
Um,
me to this
yeah.
follow-up question. Do you teach interpreting humor? Humor is so based on ideas and references from a specific culture or point of view. And if someone is at a diplomatic meeting and they make a lighthearted comment, how do you interpret humor?
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's such a wonderful question. And, the students always ask about it, and we always practice with different speeches, and some of them have a joke or humor. So, first of all, what is something very important in interpretation is key, is to know culture, right? So, that's why your language combination is very important. So, for example, in my case, A, which means is the main language, is my native language, the language that I interpret into. So that's Spanish. And then the languages that I interpret from, English and French. So you have to know their cultures very, very well to understand that humor. So, for example, here in the US, I've been living here since 2001, right? So it's many years in the US to be able to understand, I guess, the American sense of humor, to be able to convey that sense of humor into, right, in my case, Spanish. So as well, you have to know the Spanish culture very well, or, Hispanic, Latin culture, to be able to convey the same joke in Spanish. So I think, first of all, we really, as interpreters, need to know the cultures that we work with very well to be able to convey that humor and that joke in particular.
Such an important and difficult job. Nothing but respect and admiration for what you have done and for you lifting up the next generations of students who'll be doing that going on in the future.
Yes, well, Andrew, it's the privilege of a lifetime. Again, I don't know what we do, at Middlebury, but we always have the best students. you know, Honestly, they are. You should. I hope you have the chance to meet my students, first years and second years. I mean, they are just really wonderful. I feel the energy in the classroom is always so positive, and they are so eager to learn. So I feel they'll be the best interpreters and translators that we'll ever have. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the platform. I know that the world of interpretation, maybe it's, a big unknown for a general audience. So if, students, your viewers, if they have questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to me and let me know if you have any questions. I hope people find my article interesting, and, I'll always be here for anybody who has questions about interpretation.
Thank you so much. I'm going to end the stream, but we'll stay here on Zoom for a moment.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.